Hello, welcome to my channel. My name is Dale Hawthorne. I'm going to take up a question which I noticed was put to Charlie Kirk, and Charlie, it was about a young lady showed up at the microphone and asked Charlie whether about the book burning of Sappho, and Charlie respectfully and rightfully demurred to answer the question because he said, "I don't know anything about Sappho," which is fine. You know, he gave an honest, good faith answer, and she let it go. So I'm going to give you my answer because I've got a little bit more familiarity with Sappho. It's doesn't make me any better than Charlie. I think Charlie was a good man and tragic death, but his witness has gone forward around the world. But I'm sure that Charlie would say something like this because I've heard him on other videos say something like this: that being a Christian doesn't mean that I do or must explain or approve all the actions throughout history of those who call themselves Christians. In other words, that we go back to the Bible, seek to follow Jesus as best we can, and work with them. If their actions were according to the Bible, we can approve them and say, yes, they were following the Bible, they were following Jesus. If the actions of other Christians were brutal, oppressive, unwise, and foolish, we can disapprove them based on the Bible itself. And we can say, first of all, the Bible doesn't call for Christians to burn all the books which are contrary to the Bible or which they find morally or spiritually offensive. Yeah, that's we don't find a command like that. But if you own books which you find spiritually and morally offensive, if you come to saving faith in Jesus and you look at your library and say, I don't want to own this anymore, you can reject and burn that as much as you want because that's your private property. And there actually was a scene in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 19, verses 18 through 19, where a number of the Christians said, many of those who are now believers came confessing and divulging their practices. And a number of those who had practiced magic arts brought their books together and burned them in the sight of all, and they counted the value of them, and they found it came to 50,000 pieces of silver. So yeah, this was their private property, their own books, and their books of magic arts. We've had some of these manuscripts come down to us, and they're not of real literary merit. They're actually kind of dumb, actually kind of superstitious. They're not deep or eloquent literature, and they tend to be fairly obnoxious spells and curses. So it reminds you how much in that culture people feared the magic arts, spells, and curses. And you can find this in a number of places around the world today, even places which claim to be nominally Christian, where people will fear black magic, spells, and curses, and try to avoid that. So that's that said, if you have books which are you find spiritually or morally objectionable and your private property, you're free as a person to burn them. It doesn't mean you want to burn every single copy of that book that everyone ever had, but there could possibly be a groundswell of revolt that would happen in a culture that might have that. But I'm not saying that I would have any books I'd like to burn myself, except that that again, your private property. If you find it that you come in your possession, you want to get rid of it, you can. So, Sappho and the archaic poets themselves. Speaking about them, I've had a bit of a background in them. This is my book on Greek lyric poetry. It was I had a class on this in fall of '78, and yeah, Sappho's in here, right here. Yeah, this thing right here, this gobbledygook which I held up there, that's Sappho. That's Sappho. You got the doing things with the meter and putting in some of the vocabulary, so on. There's a number of pages. We didn't lose all our works. We lost a lot of them. Apparently, the number of works was greater, but she's not entirely lost. We got an idea of some of the best stuff that she had. There are also other of the archaic poets like Archilochus, who's one of the earliest ones, Alcaeus, her brother, who does have a very interesting um, bit where he mentions that he killed a very large warrior who was fought against them. I believe he was serving as a mercenary for Nebuchadnezzar, who's mentioned in the Bible. Alcaeus Mimnermus, who I found him to be kind of revolting, very, very immoral, and so on. So some of their images are seductive. They can be even seem like pornographic, is trying to put it this way. That may be technically good poetry as far as the use of meter and images and like that, but a lot of people might find the subject matter icky or embarrassing. There are a lot of them I wouldn't want them to be circulated among children, sometimes even adolescents. And as I was translating them, I found some parts were embarrassing even at age 21. And Peter would be amazed to know, but this is a fragment of Archilochus, which was lost, a fairly long poem. It was a seduction scene. So, and that got to be kind of strange working through that in a class with a professor who had some Freudian ideas about Greek poetry. So Peter would probably fall off his chair if he knew that I still had this in my possession. I didn't get rid of it, but whatever. So, what happened? Did they actually burn Sappho's works? Well, this is what Wikipedia has to say about the manuscript copies. Sappho, the text wall up there, seems to have disappeared, and the passage of time destroyed Sappho and her works. And there was a legend that Sappho's poetry was lost because of her morals. And these legends appear to have originated in the Renaissance around 1550. Jerome Cardan wrote that Gregory Nazianzen had her work publicly destroyed. At the end of the 16th century, Joseph Justus Scaliger claimed that her works were burned in Rome and Constantinople in 1073 on the orders of Pope Gregory VII. And that gives where the legend came from. It's apparently legendary. We don't have any contemporary witnesses, but as a matter of fact, quite at least 500 years after it's supposed to have happened, maybe many centuries afterwards. So, but Wikipedia does give this right here. In reality, Sappho's work was probably lost, as the demand for it was insufficiently great for it to be copied onto parchment when codices superseded papyrus rolls as a predominant form of book. Book with a cover, just like a normal book we have today. A contributing loss to the factor of the loss of her poems may have been her Aeolic dialect, considered provincial in a period where the Attic dialect was seen as the true classical Greek and had become the standard for literary compositions consequently. Many readers found her dialect difficult to understand. In the 2nd century AD, the Roman author Apuleius specifically remarks on its strangeness, and several commentators on the subject demonstrate the difficulties that readers had with it, part of a more general decline in interest in the archaic poets, and the surviving papyri suggest that Sappho's poetry lasted longer than that of her contemporaries such as Alcaeus, and Alcaeus, as I remember, would have been her brother. So, dialect more than subject matter, perhaps? Yeah, it was a difficult dialect. Again, one of the things I got here, Greek dialects. These poems are in different dialects of Greek. Even Homer is in a different dialect of Greek in the New Testament. The Attic dialect of the classical Greek is the one which I was taught to learn Greek, and then you go there to the other dialects and you learn the differences. And it's not easy going with something of a different dialect. I remember that back in my Greek lyric poetry class, it took about 2 hours to get through 100 lines of Doric Greek, one of the poems that came from Sparta, Alcman. I was working with Peter, a PhD in Greek, and who was a specialist in Pindar, who was difficult Greek. So, being a difficult dialect might have meant people just simply stopped understanding and relishing it. And subject matter may have been embarrassing, and literature was also recited in public also at that time. Homer kept on being recited because there were these guys named rhapsodes who would go around, memorize Homer, and go around and perform it in public. And maybe they considered Sappho wasn't exactly the type of poetry that would have pulled in an audience because of dialect, subject matter, and it was very introspective and so on. So um, there was a young romance that was circulating late in the Roman Empire, Daphnis and Chloe. You can still find it. It's worth reading. Kind of a young romance. It did uphold traditional marriage and the honeymoon and so on. So Sappho doesn't seem to have actually been lost because of book burning mobs. So, and as Christians, I wouldn't approve of mob action in such a situation to ransack someone's house, pull out his books, and burn them. So, if the books were considered immoral, it's understandable that someone wouldn't want them, but we don't know exactly what legal options might have been available, who owned the books, who could access the books, and so on. There doesn't seem to have been a book burning mob as part of this. And if it's someone's private property in their own home and they want to get rid of their own private property that they find spiritually and morally offensive, that's their right to dispose of their private property the way that they want. And nowadays we often think, well, what about the inclusion in public libraries? Well, those books are maintained in the public libraries at public expenses for public access, as it was in that time. In Alexandria, there was the library, and there were different public libraries at different places. Usually, a great city, decent-sized city had a public library, and there are a number of private libraries too. So people were free to, then as now, to oppose books that they might find morally offensive to be included in the educational curriculum for children. So that's their right. And as we come to a conclusion here, we're going to go to a passage, Book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah chapter 36. Starting in verse 20. The book that's been most often banned and burned throughout history is the Bible itself by governments, rulers, and religious authorities. And this is a case where a book of prophecy of Jeremiah was burned during the lifetime of Jeremiah itself. I'm not sure that we have the exact words that Jeremiah wrote down, but it's possible. But this is what the Bible has to say, that that they went in the court of the king, put the scroll that Jeremiah had written in the chamber of Elishama, the secretary, and they reported all the words to the king. Then the king sent Yehudi to take the scroll, and he took it from the chamber of Elishama, the secretary, and Yehudi read it to the king and all the officials who stood beside the king. It was the 9th month, and the king was sitting in the winter house, and there was a fire burning in the fire pot for him. In other words, he had his own personal little heater. And as Yehudi read 3 or 4 columns, the king would cut them off with a knife and throw them into the fire pot until the entire scroll was consumed in the fire that was in the fire pot. So everything that Jeremiah wrote there was burned by the king, King Jehoiakim, one of the last kings of Israel. And going down to verse 27, now the king had burned the scroll. After the king had burned the scroll with the words that Baruch wrote at Jeremiah's dictation, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah. Take another scroll and write on it all the former words that were in the first scroll, which Jehoiakim the king of Jeremiah has burned. and so on. And Jeremiah and the Lord go on to tell Jeremiah that tell the king that even though he burned the scroll, it was still going to be fulfilled. So Christians have little reason to be terribly concerned, terribly fanatical about book burning, because Bibles throughout history have been very often banned and burned, even during a time that Bibles were being written and circulated, such as we see here in the book of Jeremiah. So, if it is someone's private property, they find morally objectionable, however it's come to them, that would be their right. We don't approve of book burning mobs. And people are free to dispose of their own property, and that's pretty much it. Sappho just simply seems to have fallen out of favor. Difficult to read, difficult to understand over time, and the dialects can become difficult to understand. So that's basically the answer, that no one burned Sappho's books. They simply fell out of favor. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. And continue to be curious and listen and seek for the truth. Be careful of rumors. Be careful of legends. Thank you.